Now, for the past couple of weeks, what we've been looking at is the setting up of companies. Okay, so the principles of limited liability, lifting the veil, and the procedures for what happens when somebody enters into the contract on behalf of a company that is not yet set up, and the liability. And then we started to look at issues relating to the internal management of the company, mainly looking at the Articles of Association. Now, what we're going to do for the next few weeks is to look at, well, who actually has the say in the affairs of the company? Or shall I say, who should have a say in the affairs of the company? Now, we need to bear in mind, right? In modern companies, basically, there are two main groups that are very important. One is the directors, and the other is, of course, the shareholders. Now, what we're going to look at today is when there is a conflict between the directors and the shareholders, who prevails, or who should prevail? Okay, so we're going to look at how corporate powers are being distributed between different organs, shareholders and directors. How are disputes resolved? Well, first of all, we'll look at how it arises and how is it resolved. And then we'll also look at the provisions under the Articles of Association that governs the division of power between the shareholders and the directors. Now, for most corporations, i.e. private limited companies, right, usually the shareholders and the directors are the same people. So for example, right, if you set up a company with your family members or friends, usually you would be the shareholders, and at the same time you would be the directors. Now, but for publicly listed companies, okay, then that's entirely different. Like for example, if you buy shares in HSBC, right, you're a shareholder of HSBC, but it is very unlikely, okay, that you would also be the director of HSBC. Now, so especially for large modern public corporations, okay, that has been the corporate governance issue. Now, if later on in your life, right, if you get to study corporate governance, right, you would realize, okay, the conflict between shareholders and directors is arguably the most important and controversial issue relating to corporate governance. And this is what we're going to look at today. So first of all, right, who exercise corporate powers? So first of all, of course, the board of directors. Now, because the board, i.e. directors, okay, are the managers of the company. Now, they are the managers of the company, means, okay, they decide on the day-to-day affairs of the company. Okay, so you have the directors, or board of directors, and then, of course, you have the shareholders through the general meetings. Now, that relationship between the shareholders and director, in corporate governance, we call that the principal-agent model. Okay? Shareholders is the principal, and directors, or managers, are the agent. Okay? Principal-agent model. Shareholder being a principal, directors or managers being the agents. Now, the biggest problem with that model, okay, in corporate governance or in finance, right, we call that, okay, there is what we call an agency cost. Now, what that means is, right, from the principal's perspective, i.e. the shareholder's perspective, right, there is always a cost in monitoring the behaviors of the directors. Now, we call that the agency problem or the agency cost. Now, because from principals' perspective, right, they are what we call uninformed principals. Shareholders, right, usually are what we call uninformed principal. And you have an informed agent, i.e. directors. Now, the reason why it is called the relationship, okay, or is uninformed and informed, is because in financial market terms, okay, there is something called information asymmetry. In other words, there is a cost in gathering the information from the shareholder's point of view, okay? Gathering information is both timely and costly. And directors or managers, okay, being managing the businesses on a day-to-day affairs, okay, they have first-hand knowledge of all the information, financial information, for example. So that's what we mean by information asymmetry, okay? Or to put it bluntly, right? A gap in the information. So directors tend to have the first-hand knowledge of all the information, whereas the shareholders, as uninformed principal, okay, tends to have less information, and it would cost them both time and money to actually gather that information. That's what we mean by information asymmetry. Right, so you might ask, right, so how are the powers in the company divided? And where do we look to for the division of these powers? Now, of course, the first answer to that question is the Articles of Association, the Constitution, something that we looked at last week. Now, here are some examples of division of power clauses, right? So, for example, under Table A, Companies Act UK, and Regulation 82, Table A, Companies Ordinance in Hong Kong. Now, when I say the Companies Ordinance here, right, Cap 32 is the old, okay? Is the old ordinance, okay? Not the new one, right? The business of the company shall be managed by the directors, who may pay all expenses incurred in promoting and registering the company, and may exercise all such power of the company as are not by the Act or by these regulations required to be exercised by the company in general. Right? And then go on, subject nevertheless to any of these regulations, to provisions of the Act, and to such regulations being not inconsistent with the aforesaid regulations. Now, to put it simply, okay, what it means is, right, the management power of the company, i.e. the day-to-day affairs of the company, okay, is managed by the directors or through the board. The day-to-day affairs of a company, okay, is managed by the directors through the board. In other words, it is the board of directors that exercise the day-to-day business decisions of a company. Now, the way it works is, as we'll look at later, right? Shareholders, through the general meetings, elect the directors onto the board. And once they are elected, okay, once the directors are elected, as we'll look at later, then they have the right to exercise their own discretion relating to the decisions of the company. Another example, Regulation 70, Table A, again, Companies Act 1985. Subject to the provisions of the Act, the memorandum and articles and to any directions given by special resolution, the business and affairs of the company shall be managed by the directors, who may exercise all the powers of the company. Again, okay? Directors, okay? Not shareholders, directors. So what that means is this: for private limited companies, yes, where the shareholders and directors are the same people, then of course you, the shareholders, de facto, would have a say in the affairs of the company. But when it comes to publicly listed companies, usually you, the shareholders, okay, would not have a say in the affairs of the company. Now, but is there anything that the shareholders can do to curtail the power of the directors? Now, for public companies, this is for public companies, right? The model articles, Regulation 3, subsection 1, provides that members, i.e. shareholders, may, by special resolution, i.e. a 3/4 majority, direct the directors to take or refrain from certain actions. So if you can get 75% votes, then you can direct the directors to take certain action or refrain from taking certain actions. Now, but then the question is, right, in reality, is if you are shareholders of publicly listed companies, is how do you manage to get 75% of your votes? Especially here in Hong Kong, where most listed companies are majority owned by one group of shareholders anyway. I.e., for example, families, for example, or the government. So what is the problem here? Okay, so what is the problem here? Now, first of all, as I said, right, in corporate governance, this dilemma between the shareholders, principal, and the directors as agents has been the most controversial issue in modern corporate governance. Now, because what happens is in reality is very often the directors would use their powers as directors and take abusive actions. For example, right, they may use their power to sell assets of the company at a heavily discounted price to someone that they know or to their family members. Okay. Disposition of corporate assets. What if the director sells the assets at a severe undervalue? Secondly, supposing you, the shareholders, okay, wants to take a legal action against the abusive directors, how do you do it? And more importantly, as we'll look at later on in the course, right, should you take legal actions against the directors on your own initiative or in the name of the company? And of course, there's legal costs related to that, which we'll look at later. Also, another issue, election of board members, corporate officers. For example, as shareholders, how do you ensure that the directors you elect actually represent your interests on the board? What if the board of directors nominate a director that you as the shareholders do not like? Is there anything you can do about it? Now, another issue is, of course, relating to admitting new shareholders, admitting members. Now, what if you're an existing shareholders, and what if the directors now recommend to bring in new shareholders that actually control the company? Is there anything that you, as the existing shareholders, can do? Right. So, for example, right, they now bring in new. You used to own, say, for example, 50% of company shares. Now they recommend that we should issue further shares, new shares. Let's suppose you don't have the money to buy it. And then the directors suggest that, well, why don't we bring in a new shareholders? Now, what that would do is, right, of course, that would dilute your control. Now, as shareholders, do you think there's anything you can do? Or maybe, which we'll look at later. Now, for a very long time, this is the 19th century we're talking about, right? It was thought it was the shareholders that control the company. Now, because the argument there was, right, in the early 20th century or late 19th century, the argument there was, right, shareholders are the principal, directors are the agents. So, as agent, of course, you are answerable and accountable to your principal, the shareholders. So, for quite a long time, during the 19th century, and at least until the early 20th century, it was thought that shareholders control the company. Until this case called automatic self-cleaning versus Cunningham came about in the early 20th century. Again, we'll look at this in more details later. Now, what happened in this case was, okay, there were 2,700 shares in the company. And the plaintiff here held 1,202 shares of the company. Okay, so out of 2,700 shares, the plaintiffs, they held 1,202 shares. Now, what the plaintiff wanted, he wanted the company to sell its assets to another company. Now, during the shareholders' annual general meeting, he managed to get 1,502 of the shares to vote in favor of the resolution with his friends. Okay, so 1,502 out of 2,700, okay? A little bit more than 55%. So here we have a simple majority. Okay, so he managed to get 1,500 shares together with his friend to pass the resolution, and he wanted to direct the company to sell the assets to another company. Now, as the facts turned out, the directors of the company, they were opposed to this idea. Okay, they opposed to this idea. And they declined to comply with the shareholders' resolution. So what the plaintiff then decided to do, he decided to bring an action in the name of the company, automatic self-clearing, against the directors, including Mr. Cunningham, who was also one of the directors. Now, at first instance, the judge in the High Court held that on the true construction of the articles of the company, that unless directors were given through special resolution, i.e. 75% majority, then it was impossible for the majority to override the decisions of the director. Okay? Unless directors were given instructions through special resolution, 75% majority, then it was impossible for a mere majority, 51%, to override the decisions of the directors. Now here, as we said earlier, right, the plaintiff only managed to get 1,500 votes, i.e. 55%. Now, on appeal, the Court of Appeal then affirmed the High Court's decision, and held that a simple majority of shareholders not enough to override the requirement in the articles. Now, because the articles of the company, okay, required that shareholders can only instruct directors if they manage to get 75%. But here, they only managed to get 55%. Now, what about the question, okay, the court asks, right, what about the question that as agent, how can you reject a decision made by the principal? So we said that, right, as directors, you're agent of the principal. So based on the relationship between principal and agent, how can an agent, okay, reject the decision made by a principal? Now, the court in this case held, the Court of Appeal, right, said this very clearly. What they said was, directors, okay, directors, they were not agents of the shareholders. Okay, directors, strictly speaking, they are not agents of the shareholders. Which means they are not bound to implement the resolutions passed by shareholders. Then you might ask, well, if they're not agents of the shareholders, then who are they agent for? Well, according to the Court of Appeal, well, they are agent of, quote, the company as a whole. Okay? They are agents of the company as a whole, not just the shareholders. Does that make sense? Now this was based on the Companies Act 1862, okay, the decision says, right? It says, Regulation 55, the business of the company shall be managed by directors who may exercise all such powers of the company. Okay? So, according to the Court of Appeal, by an strict interpretation of the Moro Articles, it is the directors that make the day-to-day decisions of the company. Now then you might ask, well, what if the shareholders, what if I'm not satisfied with the decisions with the directors make? Now what the court said was, right, as shareholders, you have the right to elect the directors onto the board. But once they are elected, they do whatever they want regarding the company's decision. And if you're not satisfied with that decision, it is up to you, the shareholders, to vote them out of office in the next round. So basically the analogy, okay, is the same as a democracy, okay? In a democratic society, you have the right to elect your leaders. But once that leader is elected as president or prime minister or whatever, they do whatever they want with their policy. And if you, the voters, are not satisfied with that policy or with that decision, then it is up to you to vote him out of office in the next general election. Okay? The same analogy applies here, according to the court, right? Once they're elected, they have the discretion to do whatever they want with the company's decision. And if you, the shareholders, do not like that decision, then it is up to you to get enough votes in the next round to vote him out of office. Whether you can get that, okay, is entirely up to you. Yeah?
Can that be a special resolution to vote them out?
Yeah, you can. You can, if you can get that. Yeah. Now, this decision was later also confirmed in another decision called Quinn and Axton versus Salmon. Now, what happened in this case was Quinn and Axton Limited was set up as a business for providing furniture and general warehouse. Mr. Williams Axton was the chairman. Mr. Joseph Salmon and a person called Arthur Way were managing directors of the company. Now what happened was, in the year 1906, someone called Mr. Toms replaced Mr. Arthur Way as managing director and held the majority shares of the company. Now, based on the constitution of the company, it says, quote, no resolution would be effective if either Axton or Salmons disagree. Okay? No resolution would be effective if either Mr. Axton or Mr. Salmons disagree. And the directors, however, were otherwise left to manage the company in whatever manner it wanted. Now what happened subsequently, Mr. Axton, he wanted to acquire some properties for the company, but Mr. Salmon at this time disagreed. Okay, so Axton wanted to buy properties, Salmon disagreed. And what happened was an extraordinary general meeting was held where the same resolution was passed by a majority of shareholders. So here, again, the issue, right? Can the shareholders, by a majority, instruct the board of directors? Can the majority shareholders, by passing a resolution, instruct the board of directors? Now, the House of Lords held that where the relevant articles are in the normal form, as exemplified by successive model sets of articles, the general meeting cannot interfere with the decision of the directors unless they are acting contrary to the provisions of the articles. Now, in other words, what the court is saying is, right, on a day-to-day level, okay, just like automatic self-cleansing and Cunningham, right, on a day-to-day level, once the board of directors are elected, they decide the company's decision, okay, not the shareholders. Unless as shareholders, you are able to get a special resolution to instruct how the board is to act according to the regulation of the articles. If you can get special resolution, you can instruct directors to act, or as I mentioned earlier, you can try to vote them out of office in the next round. Otherwise, it is the directors, the board of directors, that make the call in relation to the decisions of the company. Now, basically, that is the modern view in relation to the decision-making of a company. Okay? What that means is, right, on a day-to-day level, it is the directors, through the board, that exercise the decisions of the company. So what to invest in, where to invest in, what corporate assets to buy or not to buy, okay? Those crucial decisions of a company, they are all exercised by the board of directors, not the shareholders. Now this has now been confirmed, this modern view, okay, has now been confirmed in a case called Bretland Group Limited versus London and Suffolk. Now what happened in this case was, the majority shareholder attempted to start a litigation to bring a court case in the company's name against the managing director. So the majority shareholder wants to bring an action against the managing director in the name of the company. But the board of directors, okay, as a collective body, they challenge the litigation, arguing that it had no authority to do so, even with a shareholder resolution. And the court agreed with the board of directors and held that the litigation could not be continued. Why? Simple. Because it is the board of directors that decide on this kind of decision. Corporate litigation, okay, it is the board of directors that make a decision as to whether or not it would or can continue in the name of the company. Now, similarly, this was also illustrated in a Hong Kong case called Tang Kam Yip versus Yao Kung School. Now, what happened in this case was the school was registered as a company limited by guarantee. So it had no share capital, and its purpose was to serve 7 villages in the new territories. Okay, so it was set up as a company limited by guarantee, no share capital, and the purpose was to serve 7 villages in the new territories. Now, what happened here was a resolution was passed at a general meeting which rectified resolutions of its board of directors and provided that each village was to be represented by an equal number of shares. Okay, so each of those 7 villages was to be represented by an equal number of shares. Now, subsequently, what happened was the directors passed a resolution to admit 4 more members, resulting in the representation of the village being unequal. So by admitting these 4 members, okay, the representation of the village would become unequal. Now, the memorandum and articles of association of the company contain an article which was similar in terms to Article 31 of the model articles, which is Regulation 30 here. It says, right, the business of the school shall be managed by directors, subject nevertheless to any regulations of the articles, to the provisions of the ordinance, company's ordinance, and to such regulations not being inconsistent with the aforesaid regulations. And the issue before the court here was whether the general meeting had the power to direct the directors in their decisions to admit members. Now, what the court held in this case was Regulation 30 of the company's constitution was based on Article 31 of the model articles and conferred on the directors only those power relevant to the management of the school. Okay? Only those powers relevant to the management of the school. And on the facts, the court concluded that admission of new members, quote, was not part of the school's business. Okay? Admission of new members was not part of the school's business. And what it meant was, if it is not part of the school's business, then it means the directors do not have the power to make that decision. So basically what it means is, right, whenever there's a dispute between the shareholders and the directors, okay, we first look to the constitution of the company. Secondly, it also means, right, As shareholders, you do not control the decisions or instruct how the directors make their decisions simply by passing a simple majority. Now, if the model articles provide that you could instruct how the directors to do under a special resolution, it means you require a 75% majority to do so. Otherwise, it is the directors that make the day-to-day decisions regarding the company. Because the court made it very clearly, right, in Cunning. As directors, they are not agents of the shareholders. Strictly speaking, as directors, they are not agents of the shareholders. They are agents of the company. They are agents of the company. Now, something similar was also decided in the Singaporean case, right, called Credit Development versus IMO Limited. Now, what happened here was, there was a request made by the defendant shareholder, who held 7%, setting out 7 resolutions that it wanted to move in the upcoming general meetings. Now, all these requisitions, all the requests, was rejected on the ground that they came within the purview of directors. And the issue before the court was whether the 2 of the 7 requests, relating to the appointment of accountants and solicitors were valid. Now, because under the Articles of Association, under Regulation 88 of the Articles of Association, it provided that the appointment, the appointment of professionals such as solicitors and accountants is subject to the monitoring and decisions of the shareholders. Subject to the supervision and decision of the shareholders. So that issue before the court was right. Is it valid? In other words, does it comply with Regulation 88 of the Articles of Association? For the court held yes. If the Articles of Association provides for it, then we look to the Articles of Association for the decision. Now, what the court said here was, yes, it is the directors, who decide who to appoint as professionals or solicitors or accountants of the company. However, it doesn't mean that the shareholders cannot supervise that decision. Now, because if you look at Regulation 88, it says, right, the business of the company shall be managed by the directors, but that's basically the model regulations for almost all companies, right? So, be managed by directors, subject, nevertheless, to the provisions of the statutes, these articles and to such regulations as may many be subscribed by the company in general meeting. In other words, shareholders in general meeting still has the right to monitor that decisions made by the directors. Yes, it is you, the directors, who make the decisions, but it doesn't mean the shareholders through general meeting cannot supervise or monitor that decision. So why is it that the court, since the 20th century, has decided, okay, that it is the directors, and not the shareholders that make the decisions? Now, because if you look at the decisions like Quinton Actions, Cunningham, etc., right? What the court's been saying is, right, as directors, okay, they are the ones elected to manage the day-to-day affairs of the company. Now, because what the court is saying is, right, if you are saying that it is the shareholders that make the decisions of the company, then why have a director at the first place? Why not just do away with the board of directors and then the shareholders at the general meeting make all the decisions? So from a practical perspective, according to the court, then of course, okay, if you elect someone as director, as managers, then of course it is the manager that make the day-to-day decisions of the company, not you as a director. For example, if you look at Quinton Action, right? According to law then, right? Now it may be a question for argument, but for my own part, I should require a great deal of argument to satisfy me that the word regulation in this article does not mean the same things as articles. Now, basically what he was referring to there, right? If the article says it is the directors that manage the business of the company, then of course we look to the articles, i.e. the regulations of the articles. Because we know that all model articles nowadays, right, the modern ones, right, they all say that it is the directors that manage the day-to-day affairs of the company. If that's what it says in the articles, then we abide by the spirit of the article. And in Scott versus Scott, what Lord Coxon says, right? To begin with, quote, I do not take the view that those limiting words subject nevertheless, and so forth, have anything to do with the duty cast upon the directors in the first two lines of the articles to manage the business of the company. Okay, in other words, what he's saying is, right, yes, we agree that as shareholders, you have the right to monitor and supervise the director. However, okay, it does not mean that you can interfere with the day-to-day affairs of the company as if you are the directors. Well, basically what he's saying, right? We first of all look to the first two lines of the regulations of the articles. Okay, the first two lines, right? Directors manage the business of the company. Full stop. And if you are not happy with that, according to the court, well, you either get a special resolution, as provided under the articles, or, as I said earlier, try to vote them out of office in the next round. Otherwise, as shareholders, you do not have the right to interfere with the management decision of the board of directors. Okay, we'll take a short break and come back and continue this.